Dobrze. Okay. Okay.
Hello. Please open your video. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So I count on your participation in the discussion today. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. Dziękuję bardzo, Natalia, za pomoc. I lost my phone. Well, I had a problem with my phone. I couldn't get the link, but I sent to the office and
Okay.
to several people. But Natalia was the quickest. So thank you very much, everyone.
So since there will be not too many participants, I think it's I think it would be nice to see everyone. So please open your video, because some people are now hidden. So I only see the names: Charles Adrian, Dominika Byczkowska, I see. Yeah, so she's on the list, but hi.
Hi, hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. Yeah, so you managed to organize everything.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm still sick, but
Really?
yeah, so sorry, I'm just trying to.
Fortunately, you don't look like a sick person.
Thank you. Yeah, but I mean, COVID is a nasty thing, so.
Oh, you've had COVID.
Yeah. Yes. It's been 3 weeks now, and
Wow.
It's really.
yeah.
But did you manage to send your manuscript?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
So now you are more or less free to do other things.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So who do we have here as well?
Yeah. We have here. We have our public relations. We have Edith. Hello, Edith. Show yourself, please.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi.
It's nice to see you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
So I believe Kasia will be as well, but so let's wait still. Moreover, I don't see our guests from Scotland yet. So
Are you back in Warsaw, Edith?
Yes, I came back before Christmas. How about you?
No, I'm in Warsaw. I'm at work actually.
Oh, I see you're in.
Yeah, I have the option of coming to my office, and there's only 2 people from the whole department who actually work in the office, so I have the whole staff room to myself. I can't work at home because I got a son, I got a dog, and all sorts of other stuff going on.
Yeah, I guess everybody has this Zoom fatigue anyway, so it's good that you're encouraged to do that.
Yeah. Hello, Kirsty. It's nice to see you.
Hello, I hope I'm not late.
No, we are still waiting for a few more people.
That's
So
good.
so far we are in everybody whom you can see on the screen are members of the European Studies Unit. So,
okay.
but since this is, oh yeah, there's Andre as well. Hello, Andre. So now all are this unit, and but this seminar is open, so we have several people from outside, from variety of universities in Poland.
Okay.
For example, Ms. Dominika Byczkowska just let me know on chat that she is unable to open her camera. So,
Okay.
but she's from the University of Łódź, as I see here. Yeah, so it's. So, but I would like to ask whoever can, please open your camera so we could see each other. Yeah. So we just wait 2 more minutes and then we.
Don't worry, it's fine. I made myself a small coffee.
Very good. So it's
actually meant to be a Greek coffee, so I'm still practicing, but since we can't travel at the moment. How is the weather in Poland? We had in Edinburgh this morning. We have snow, which is not so common for us. So.
No, Edinburgh it's so rare to have snow.
Yes, I think because we're on the east coast, so we're by the sea, so it's not very warm, but it's not like the Highlands of Scotland, which has snow all the time, of course.
We had a very real winter with very low temperatures a few days ago, but now it's becoming warmer, so it's
okay.
So it's and even we have some sunshine in Warsaw at least. Yeah.
Oh well, send some over here, please.
Yeah. So Andrzej, are you in Warsaw already or still from Hague?
No, still from the Netherlands.
From Netherlands, I see. So when exactly you are returning?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yes.
I see. Good. Yeah. So. Okay, so I think it may be that in the meantime some more people would join us, but we should start. So I first would like to welcome Dr. Kirsty Hughes, who is a director of and founder of the Scottish Centre for on International Relations, and with a long history of activities in variety of think tanks in Europe. And writing about European matters, about the EU enlargement into Central and Eastern Europe, but also about Turkey's EU accession process and others. But in fact, I owe Dr. Hughes this idea to have today's debate, because I at certain point read her text, which everybody already received before our meeting today, and this really appeared as something that basically we cannot avoid to discuss. Moreover, as some of you probably know, the recent survey of YouGov shows that right now 51% of the British population think that Brexit was not a good idea. But and we should remember that we are just at the beginning of the process in all effects of this decision to leave European Union. Also, we should remember that United Kingdom in the past, I mean, in this, when it applied for membership in European community, did it 3 times. Only the third one was successful, which shows not only some hesitation on part of de Gaulle basically at that time, but also insistence and strong conviction of leaders in the United Kingdom at that time that membership in this integrating Europe is vital for Britain. So of course, it's no wonder that leaving European Union was something which surprised many. Especially if we look at the global situation. We have, after all, the world of basically three great powers right now competing openly already, and that is United States, China, and European Union. And the question is, where is the place for Britain in such a world? Of course, this dream about returning to the empire position is still present in United Kingdom, but everything shows that it's practically impossible. So basically, leaving European Union made all important positions of UK somehow relatively less significant. I mean, the size of economy, which is substantial, within European Union was definitely more significant than outside European Union. Great Britain indeed has great universities, and it's a very attractive place to visit and to cooperate. But of course, being outside, again, it's becoming somehow questionable. It's just one of the positive aspects of this state. The same is with a military power, which, as we know, is equipped with nuclear arms, and many others. So all these aspects of important position of Great Britain somehow relatively are less important, less significant now. Also, we can't say that taking back the control, as Brexiteers announced they want, and they is not the fact. If we look at this negotiations with European Union over this trade and treaty, Britain has very little to control. Also, if we look at the situation within United Kingdom, and something that Dr. Hughes in her text expressed precisely, so basically there are very little chances that Northern Ireland will not join Irish Republic during the next, let's say, a decade, maybe earlier. Also, Scotland, as you will still probably hear from Dr. Hughes, will vote over independence, and probably it won't be easy. If we remember the current position of Prime Minister of United Kingdom, but it's quite likely that Scotland in a certain future, and I think it not necessarily must be a very distant future, also the problem of making it a peaceful process is really difficult. And we should remember that British nuclear submarines are located in Scotland, so which makes it even more difficult to achieve. Anyway, so this is why we think, and I think I myself think, and probably many of my colleagues, that United Kingdom at certain point not so distant in time, will decide to reapply for membership in the European Union. I should tell you certain problems we had at the beginning, because originally we formulated the topic for this debate of today a little bit differently. So it was like when the UK rejoins EU, full stop, which means that we simply assumed that it's absolutely certain. But of course, what was interesting was the situation in the world and the situation in Europe, and especially in Britain. Because of course, it's absolutely clear that the position of Britain applying for accession will be much weaker than when it left European Union. But then we simply decided that we should be less ambitious in this discussion, and simply should ask when European Union indeed has a chance to apply and rejoin European Union, which means more interest on and more focus on the process to this moment than to the period after this possible accession. In fact, this is what Dr. Hughes has written in this in her text. It was exactly about this period after leaving the European Union and before a possible accession, which, as I understand, she do not expect during the next decade. I mean, it's so. I am not sure. Certainly, the most difficult aspect will be negotiation with the British government, with especially current government, as we know. Prime Minister is against of even referendum over independence. Anyway, so please, Kirsty, you have the floor and tell us a little more.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And yes, please call me Kirsty. It's great to meet you all. It'd be nice to return to Poland one day, and I'm sure it'll be nice for you to travel again sometime as well. In your introduction, you said in the past, I certainly wrote a lot about different EU enlargements, and especially the one to Poland and all the other Central European countries. The days before, I seem to, the last 5 years, I've mostly seemed to have written endlessly about Brexit, and when you look at where we are, you have to slightly wonder why. But it also, if you'll permit me, one small memory. I was actually working at a German think tank in Berlin when the Berlin Wall came down back in 1989, so before some of you were born, I suspect. And I looked at a map one day and I thought, oh well, Poland's not very far away. Why don't I drive to Poland for the day? And I drove off to some small village that was the border crossing, and I could see the border crossing, and I pulled my car in behind about 6 other cars. And then someone came and knocked on my window and politely pointed out that there was actually hundreds of cars queuing across the street and down the road, and that the queue took about a day, and would I please go to the back of the queue? So I didn't know that 31 years later or 32 years later, that would be the situation to some extent for lorries trying to go from the UK to the European Union, but so it is, and that's very sad. Whereas the enlargement process, for all its ups and downs back then, was very, very positive, I think, very obviously very important. I'm going to maybe say a few words for about a quarter of an hour, not only talking to my short paper, but I do think it's, you know, there are obviously some really important and interesting and not always easy to answer political questions here, and it's so easy in Brexit to get dragged down into the important technical detail, and at the moment in the UK that's especially happening because people, you know, whether they're musicians or fishermen or bankers, are saying, well, why can't we do what we used to do, and why do we have to fill in this mountain of forms? And that's all very important, but behind it, as always, lies the politics. I think, you know, we're on the 21st of January. We fortunately now have a new Biden president in the US, so that's positive so far this year. But obviously it's only in the last 3 weeks that the UK is fully and finally out of the EU single market and customs union, having left the EU as a member last year, 31st of January, so almost a whole year ago. And if we think about what happened, not just in the last year, but in the years since the 2016 vote, there's a lot of things that didn't happen. So the UK didn't extend the transition. It could have extended it last June, which was the deadline. And even in the face of the COVID pandemic, and even in the face of not having a deal at that point, Boris Johnson's government obviously refused to do that. There was no second referendum. There was no people's vote. I went and marched in London and Edinburgh and elsewhere, and the Scottish National Party a couple of years ago came out in favour eventually of a second referendum on the European Union, but it wasn't to be. As Joseph has already said, you know, there's been a series of polls that if you take out the don't knows, I think is now as high as 55% of people think the decision to leave the EU is wrong. But most of the polls, I think it's true to say, since perhaps as early as 2018 or certainly 2019, expressed the view that it was wrong, but it was always remained very close, just as the original vote was. So a lot of those divisions and stark differences of views didn't go away, even if a 55% thinking it's wrong looks like quite a big gap at the moment. There was no compromise on the type of Brexit. I always thought the logic of Brexit, to the extent there was any logic in it, meant we'd get to the sort of situation we are in now. But a lot of people, including the Scottish government, and some of the Labour opposition, though Labour's policy positions on Brexit have never been very clear, sadly, wanted a softer Brexit and thought that might be a compromise, but there was no effort to compromise with the 48% who voted Remain, with the Scottish or Northern Ireland majorities that voted Remain. And I mean, if you seem calmer now, I suppose, but if you think back to 2 years ago when Theresa May was Prime Minister and trying to get the initial withdrawal agreement through Parliament, to quite extraordinary scenes and political dynamics, principally within the Conservative Party, but also in terms of the opposition parties failing to really see how to handle opposition and how to be a voice for Remain. So I think British politics has been severely weakened and damaged in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think it remains so. And I guess we'll come back to that in the discussion and in wondering whether the UK could ever rejoin. It's obviously been a process, being a hard Brexit, one with extraordinary economic as well as political effects. And I do think the Northern Ireland Protocol is a quite extraordinary thing. It was a very welcome thing. The last thing we wanted Brexit to do, given it happened at all, was to damage the peace process on the island of Ireland. But to actually agree to something that fragments your own state, that puts an internal customs and regulatory border between Britain and Northern Ireland is quite an extraordinary thing to do, let alone when you're talking about taking back sovereignty. As I already mentioned, we now have President Biden, and there's been a lot of discussion and also relief that Trump has gone, but a lot of discussion around his big lie that he won the election and that the election results were were fake. And I think in the UK, some people see Boris Johnson as quite like Trump and others less so, but we've certainly got our own set of lies and ideology and propaganda. And maybe Johnson and the Tories are more isolated now Trump has gone. I think to some extent that's true. But we've still got those lies in place. And even now, look at conservative reactions to the fact that there's barely any trucks at the moment crossing the channel, that you've got some Scottish fishermen who voted for Brexit taking 2 days to cross the North Sea to sell their fish at Danish auctions, which they're apparently allowed to do, and the Northern Ireland border, and that's even with already at the moment some 3 and 6 month grace periods, so-called, on some of the bureaucracy, and yet you still see the sort of denial or even barefaced lies from the UK government, and not always called out as such by the UK's media. So we saw towards the end of Trump's presidency that the US media were increasingly calling out his lies and labeling them as false, and we didn't see that so much in the UK. We obviously, Joseph has already pointed at this, we've obviously got a government that has, whether we can say it's deliberate, but it was inevitable, it has trashed the UK's international reputation. I've done quite a lot of interviews across different member states this year for a couple of different papers I was writing, and a lot of people, apart from, sometimes they say, well, people are laughing at the UK when they look at what happened in the last few years, or they're troubled, or they think it's extraordinary and it's terrible, and what they say, what happened to British pragmatism and professionalism. And then amidst all those things you can imagine people saying, they also say, well, they're just rather baffled, because of course it is such a shift. Where did this shift come from? Where did the Eurosceptic takeover of the British Conservative Party come from? So I think that's another big issue. And it was also striking, and again, Joseph talked about, the power the UK had as a large member of the European Union. It's just a medium-sized country on the global stage at best, but it had a lot of influence. And I was talking to people for a paper on how the how the EU sees the UK and Scotland in the autumn, and so many people in different countries. I talked to people in Prague, and they'd say to me, well, we particularly appreciated the UK's policies on the single market and on Russia. I talked to people in the Netherlands, and they'd tell me about their close historical ties, and that it was always, even though the UK wasn't in the euro, it was useful to have the UK as counterbalance to France and Germany, and so on. And so that sense of the UK as an important player, influential player, it's very clear when you talk to people across the EU, but much less clear, unfortunately, when you talk to people in Britain. Is the UK going to rejoin? Well, I don't think anytime soon. I don't think it would be welcome anytime soon, though we know that politics can change very quickly. It's quite likely it may never rejoin. It's the more positive spin you could put on what's happened is that UK is sort of turning itself into a kind of Canada on the edge of the European continent. And then there's, of course, the question of, will it actually exist as a state to rejoin? If we're looking beyond 10 years' time or wondering in a generation, which is what some people, different EU interviews I did suggested, in a generation's time, by which I think people meant 20 years, will it just be England and Wales, or will it just be England? And what sort of state will that England be? I think these are all questions to discuss, but it's not actually very easy necessarily to come to the answer. I think in my article, and in the title, I said, well, is the UK's European question solved? On the one hand, I'd say to that, well, no, not at all. It's not going to go away at all. We're now, I think, what I call the satellite of the European Union, and we're condemned a bit like the Swiss and others to to permanent negotiation with the EU on lots of different matters. But I think we can turn my point around and say, was there a European question to solve? You know, it is extraordinary how we got here. If you look at the polls back in 2014 or 15, it was not a salient issue. Yes, we've had the Eurosceptic media for decades, and we've had that fringe on, well, it was a fringe, now it's taken over the Conservative Party, but it was a Eurosceptic fringe of the Conservative Party, and that has also been for decades. Some of the old groups in the 1960s when they were opposing Britain joining the EU way back then. So I think how that Eurosceptic wing during the Blair years when Labour was in power, how they slowly took over the Tory party and became dominant in the Tory party, and then, as we saw in the last couple of years, pushed out the moderate members of the Conservative Party, and how the media went along with this, including went along with the lies and the ideology and the myths around taking back control, is a key part of the story. And David Cameron, if you remember, he was our Tory Prime Minister that called the referendum, has now very much disappeared from the scene. But you know, he held 2 referendums he didn't have to hold. He agreed to hold the first Scottish independence referendum in 2014, and then he agreed, completely unforced error, to hold the 2016 Brexit referendum. So looking to where we are now, as I say, I think UK politics and economics is in very deep disarray. I think we haven't by any means seen the full impact of the fact that we're outside the customs union and single market. There has been a lot of stockpiling of goods because people were concerned about borders. Anyway, we're very caught up inevitably in the COVID crisis, including its economic impacts. But I think this is going to get increasingly problematic. Lorry drivers and hauliers are refusing to take loads to the UK. Supply chains are falling apart, not surprisingly. You know, I was just one of many of experts who wrote again and again about what happens if you reintroduce non-tariff barriers, what will happen to just-in-time supply chains. I don't think all of us knew all the details of how sandwiches were made with ingredients coming from the Netherlands to England, going to Ireland and so on, but whether it's sandwiches or cars or aeroplanes, you know, everything's been impacted. So we're in deep disarray, and it's not going to get better, and we have to see what the political impacts of that are, and intertwined with the COVID politics. Obviously we have a trade and cooperation agreement. That's still a good thing. It's better than a no-deal Brexit. We have a protocol for Northern Ireland in the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson obviously threatened to break that withdrawal agreement within a year of signing it, and that's also one of the causes of the loss of trust in the UK. There's a lot to come on services. There's only a small amount on services in the trade and cooperation agreement. It's another part of the UK losing power and influence that in effect we're waiting to see if and to what extent the EU grants us financial equivalents for financial services, similarly on data services. I'll come back to this in a second, but there is no structured agreement for foreign policy cooperation, which in many ways is both quite extraordinary, but is part of the ideology of Brexit. And we have that cross-border damage that I think is only going to grow. It's worth, rather than just talking about the UK, obviously asking what the EU wants. What I got told again and again in the interviews I was doing in the autumn, despite the dismay and almost contempt for what the UK had become, there was still a very pragmatic wish for a good and positive relationship. There was certainly, assuming there was going to be a trade deal, there was no great wish to then keep renegotiating it. So I think that there will be a strong desire to let the trade side settle down, but a lot of interest in doing more on foreign policy, on climate, on security, and actually a lot of disappointment that the UK, despite what had been said in the political declaration, a lot of disappointment that the UK government didn't want to do that structured cooperation. And I think it's very telling if we look at the foreign policy side as to why the Johnson government didn't want to do that sort of structured cooperation. And I think it's about the ideology of Brexit. It's about the idea of global Britain, which is yet to be defined. And part of that is certainly a sort of imperial nostalgia. But one of the things, you have to look at some of the smaller policies sometimes. So we no longer, since we're no longer in the EU, we no longer have access to what we call the European health insurance card. So you can access EU health services when you travel. Except, this is one of the things they did agree in the trade agreement. They agreed that the UK would introduce something called a global health insurance card. So no longer a European health insurance card, but a global health insurance card. Actually, that still gives us access to EU health services when we travel, though I think not yet to the European Economic Area countries as well, but it had to be called global. And the same point for Erasmus. In the end, the UK government agreed with the EU negotiators, yes, we'd stay part of the Horizon research programme, but not part of Erasmus. And why not? Because again, the British government was going to set up a global programme for its students. And these small examples, I think, as illuminating as the fact that we see already the UK making quite a few foreign policy statements with the so-called Five Eyes countries, the intelligence cooperation countries of the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So this is some quite sort of strange, backward-looking Anglo-Saxon idea of global Britain. It's not quite, the full imperial fantasy, which would be quite hard in the face of the three blocks again that Joseph mentioned. But I think to be this kind of Anglo-Saxon, non-European is part of the ideology and propaganda that this particular British government is promoting. And therefore, what I think you'll see in terms of cooperation with the EU is you'll see, as we'll certainly see this year, you'll see the UK government put a lot of emphasis on global. There's the G7, which the UK is currently chairing. The UK, as you know, is co-chairing the COP26 summit that hopefully will happen and will happen this autumn in Glasgow, in fact, in Scotland. And it will talk to France and Germany, and it will sort of use that E3 format. But it will be very loath to have formal UK-EU cooperation, I think, because of this ideology of global Britain, and because it's also knows enough about having been in the EU to know how unequal it will be if it's the UK talking to all EU 27 as a bloc. And I think that makes it very tricky for the EU 27 member states to see how to deal with that, because obviously there does need to be some or a lot, hopefully, of foreign and security policy cooperation, and not only in NATO, but it has to be done in a way that isn't going to upset intra-EU dynamics as well. I should come to an end and let us have a discussion. Let me just make a couple more comments. I think, it's fairly obvious, but it's not obvious or in the British debate, but you can't escape geography. You can't escape trade dependency when you've got almost half your trade going to and with the European Union. And you can't, through propaganda, get out of the reality of relative power and relative influence. There is some discussion and some hope about, can the UK get closer to the EU? If we fast forward 4 years, might Keir Starmer, the sort of sober, sensible Labour opposition leader, might he build a closer relationship. And he certainly, on the one hand, he's said that, and on the other hand, he is very keen to move on from talking about Brexit, to not be labelled anymore as a Remainer. He's come out against free movement of people, which last year he was in favour of. And also, it's not at all clear how he's going to win, because Labour needs Scottish voters to win in a UK election, and Labour is trailing and has been trailing in Scotland for the last 5 years. We also just, it was on Sunday, I think, the leader of the Lib Dems, now a very small party, though they were, if you remember, in coalition with David Cameron in the early part of the last decade. But their leader on Sunday said the Lib Dems are no longer a rejoin party. Now, this is quite extraordinary, because this is, in a sense, been one of the clear positions of the Lib Dems over the last few years. They backed a second referendum on the EU. They backed rejoining. They differentiated themselves from Labour in that regard. And it's also not obvious to me, what do they gain from now rejecting that rejoin approach? But it also means there is no pan-UK party that is backing rejoining the European Union. I mean, there aren't really any pan-UK parties in the UK, because Northern Ireland has separate parties. But anyway, we tend to refer to them as pan-UK. So the biggest party backing rejoin is the Scottish National Party, the SNP. It's the third biggest party at Westminster, but obviously it wants independence in the European Union. And so what we have, and I think it's been true all along since the Brexit vote, but I think we have very separate conversations going on across the UK. We have an English, or to some extent an English and Welsh discussion about Brexit. We have completely separate Northern Ireland discussion, completely different politics, and obviously ended up in a very different and very strange and rather fascinating position if anyone's just interested in analysis and study of that, but quite extraordinary to be semi-detached from the UK state. And then you have a Scottish discussion where rejoin is, of course, a very live issue, because independence is a very live issue, and that then increases the distance, if you like, between London and Edinburgh, because every time a politician in London says, well, we have to just get on with it for the moment. We have to get on with the trade and cooperation agreement. We've done it. We have to make it work. We can't talk about rejoining. That's not realistic, maybe in a generation. And it just alienates Scotland ever more, because, I'm running a think tank in Edinburgh. I'm writing plenty of papers about what would it look like for an independent Scotland to rejoin the EU. How would the EU respond? How long might it take? How would the accession process work? So I think I can say more about Scotland in the discussion if you like. I mean, at the moment, there's been something like 18 polls since last June that show majority support for independence, anything from 51 to 58%. The point I always underline about those is the demographics of those polls. We see about 3/4 of people under 45-year-olds back independence. And I think that's not always taken on board by English politicians who can be very dismissive of the extreme nationalism, they call it, of the SNP. But if you're Labour and you want to win Scottish votes in the Scottish elections in May or the UK elections in 4 years' time, you can't simply tell 3/4 of under 45-year-olds that they're extreme nationalists and they've got it wrong. So where the Scottish politics goes is obviously very interesting and important. I think it's not clear how we may get to another referendum, but I think that the Tory position of simply saying no is probably going to become untenable. And I think including among opponents of independence, off the record, not on the public sphere, there is a sense they feel they've lost Scotland. That doesn't mean they've given up the fight. And there was an extraordinary article, it might be worth looking at if you're interested in all this. George Osborne, who's a former Tory Chancellor to David Cameron, but has now left politics and is editor of the Evening Standard, the London paper. And he wrote a short column a couple of days ago in the Standard where he basically said, and it was this crude and the arrogance is quite extraordinary, but telling, I think. He said, well, look, Northern Ireland is now in this special status. Basically, we've lost Northern Ireland. And to be really frank, nobody really cares or minds about that. That's quite extraordinary. Then, continuing in his blunt theme, he said, well, and Wales sort of doesn't matter. And I think there's very English honesty going on here. And then Scotland. Then it turns out that Scotland does matter. So Scotland's history is our history, he said. Scotland's values are our values. So I don't know who the our was in this. You know, is it the Tories? Is it the English? Is it global Britain? He said, without Scotland, we can't be a united kingdom and we'll be a second-rate power, having to sort of doff our cap to all the other big powers. And we can just dismiss this as kind of odd, but I think it's absolutely intriguing. Scotland only has 5 million people, the UK has 65 million people. So this idea that we're somehow intrinsic to the UK and mustn't be allowed to go, and he said Johnson must just keep saying no, is utterly bizarre, and it's illuminating about English attitudes, but it also underlines that there is no real conception at the moment, and there hasn't been for quite a while, of what the UK is. There is no story about what the UK is. And at the heart of the problem of that, I think, is English politics, English nationalism. It was English nationalism that drove Brexit, and it is English nationalism that is still dominating where we are in the UK at the moment. And I think that's what's very unpredictable. So, you know, you asked me to talk about whether we might rejoin, and really I've rather just talked about the state of UK politics. So there's one of our best constitutional academics in Scotland, Professor Michael Keating, who's an expert on substates. Some of you may know him. And he said these kind of multinational states like the UK tend to fall apart from the centre. And I think if you look at the centre as England and English politics, this is probably true. So I think I've talked for too long, but I hope that's okay. And I think I will just leave it there and look forward to discussing with you.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. So we have plenty of problems which probably will generate some questions. So who would like to ask or just join a discussion? I see Edith is ready to enter the discussion. Please, Edith.
Thank you, Professor Niznik, and thank you, Christine, for this very interesting presentation. Thanks for connecting the dots about why the UK will most likely not able to join the EU anytime soon. Concerning this very complex dimension of political dynamics that you just mentioned, I have a very practical but also very general question that came to my mind. I was just wondering, what specific actions would you recommend to a pro-EU opposition in Great Britain that could help to advance this closer relationship with the EU in the long run? So it would be especially interesting to hear your thoughts on this by taking into account, as you already touched upon this, the British public attitudes. And I also saw some robust polling which were saying that British people were actually fed up with the Brexit deal and all the deals around the deal. And the majority just wanted the whole saga to over with and to put an end to this argument that split the country for almost 5 years. So could you share some ideas on what could be the best course of action here? Because for me, it seems that what the best argument could be to one generationally and culturally, rather than economically, because young British people are now facing difficulties to travel freely across the continent, to get working visa, and they're being excluded from different programs like Erasmus exchange. So yeah, I mean, of course, there are many other layers here, but I think this is something very practical they have to face nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. So if anybody has related questions, so please maybe all add to edit question. Anybody would like to ask something? Oh yeah, Steve, please unmute your microphone.
Well, I just wanted to add to what Edith was saying about the kind of the fatigue. I mean, Kirsty, thank you very much for your very interesting introduction on this. You yourself very early on used the word endlessly. And I think for some people, particularly people in Britain, a lot of people just think that this has gone on and on and on. When we think back to Theresa May, it's 2 years ago, it seems like an eternity. And there genuinely does seem to be a fatigue. I can't talk about British people living in the UK, but I can talk about my own participants in my research who live in Poland long term, and the vast majority of them are Remainers, as you would probably expect.
Yeah.
And I started interviewing them in 2019, and a lot of people were very emotional and very much that there should be a second referendum and this is not democratic. But having talked to them more recently, about a year later, most people have moved on. Most people want to get on with their lives. Most people talk about their fatigue and have had enough. And I'm just wondering, as you mentioned the inauguration of Joe Biden, as that seems to have given closure to Americans who, in a sense, just want to forget the last 4 or 5 years and move on. Isn't kind of this the same feeling, do you think, for the majority of English people, that they just want to move on, get closure, forget about it? And that would just be my kind of additional comment to what Edith has asked.
Yeah. Okay, Kirsty, so please. Joanna,
yeah, it is sort of related. Kirsty, well, first of all, thank you so much for this excellent talk, because I mean it's so detailed and it's very comprehensive and really very interesting. And yeah, I do share your analysis, your prognosis as well, and this pessimism or skepticism about the EU joining the UK. The UK joining the EU anytime soon. Yeah, it's the UK is not ready, but then the EU probably won't be ready to accept UK anytime soon, and just probably the UK needs to show its goodwill and readiness for really positive cooperation. So it will take time. But my question is, where do you think? I mean, why Starmer is so cautious, not to say cowardly, on the European agenda, and you know, why? I mean, because I wasn't surprised by Corbyn's position. He has always been sort of, you know, not very sure, and then he said many things that sounded actually supporting Brexit. But Starmer seems to be very pro-European himself, but then he's so cautious not to say anything that would sound like he would be willing to have the UK rejoin. And then also this position of Lib Dems that you mentioned, but I mean, do you see where it's coming from? Why? Why there is no UK party that would support UK's rejoining the EU?
Yeah. So, Kirsty, please.
Okay, well, thank you. They're really interesting comments as well as questions, and obviously they do all link. I mean, I think, you know, to start with the fatigue point and the people just want to, I think some that was even when people were passionate about it. So I think it's quite right to say, as I think Steve did, you know, that people aren't so passionate. You know, if you ask them, they'll still have an opinion, you know, and it will still, now we see it split towards majority Remain, but, you know, if you've still got 45 or 48% Leave, you've still got, you know, quite a split there. But I think even when it was dominating the airwaves, and, you know, I was doing quite a lot of campaigning myself, not just writing, you know, analysis and research, but, you know, it sucked all the energy out of everything else. There are a lot of other things going on in the world, and so I think even when it was more passionate, and also more passionate because there was a chance to stop it still, you know. Then when we finally got to Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement and the general election in December 2019, then finally it looked like there was no chance to stop it. So obviously the reality changed. But I think especially on the side of those supporting Brexit, they wanted it to happen and then they wanted and expected nothing to change. To an extraordinary withdrawal agreement, which unlike Theresa May, fragmented the UK, put this border between Britain and Northern Ireland, and then denied that he'd done it, denied that there would be any customs checks or regulatory checks, even though this is written in an international treaty, and is still pretty much denying it today. So on the one hand, people want it to go away, but they want it to go away with problems. And of course, it's actually just at the point we're only 3 weeks into causing serious problems, and it is not going to go away. You know, and you listen, the west coast of Scotland fishermen, just to talk about fish because it's a tiny sector, but as you know, it's been very neuralgic. The west coast fishermen are the ones that do the scallops and the seafood, and they get it to France and Spain very quickly. And they didn't particularly vote for Brexit because they could see any impediment to trade was going to cause some problems. And they all drove down to London in their lorries a couple of days ago as a protest because they're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The East Coast fishermen who have voted Tory, there are a few Tory constituencies in Scotland who backed Brexit vocally, and they are now outraged at the deal. They don't think they got enough quotas. They're appalled that although there's tariff-free trade, that, you know, they've got all this bureaucracy, and as I mentioned earlier, they've even been sailing across the North Sea to sell their fish at Danish auctions. But they seem to think that the answer is not that Brexit was bad, but that we should be more like Norway. It was a bad deal, that we should have got a better deal on quotas. But of course, to get a better deal on quotas, you'd have basically had to have no deal. You'd have had to have WTO trade with even more damage to the ability to sell anything, fish or cars or anything in the EU. So a lot of denial encouraged by dishonesty from the government and from the media. And how are people now going to react? I think, you know, so I don't think it's as simple as saying, yeah, people are fed up, they don't want to argue about it anymore. They certainly don't think they can change it in the short run. There's a few keen people who have set up rejoin organizations, but on the whole, no, there's no energy there. So what's going to happen now that people are fed up with it, but their lives are going to get worse and worse, and it isn't just going to get hidden under COVID. And I also think the points that you made about youth are very, very important. The young people across the UK, including in England, were always very, very pro-European. It was one of the more encouraging parts of the whole Brexit years. Any time I went on a demonstration in London, very big, but they were so good humoured. I saw a side of England and Britain that I thought, well, we're not all bad. You know, you see families and their dogs and their children and all their homemade banners and all types of people. And of course, as some people have said, you know, in that process at that time, the UK had pretty much one of the largest European movements across the EU. I do think it's very important. I mean, Edith asked about specific actions, and I think I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, is it Jans? You know, why is Starmer so cautious? I think the more we can do to keep links, to build links, you know, we are still European, we're not in the EU, but we're still European, you know, we still can know each other, we can do research with each other, we can try and create ways to discuss together. I was very happy to talk to the German Green MEP Terry Ranker a month or so back, and she was saying she's very keen to encourage Brits to be involved in the Future of Europe conference whenever that gets going. I don't know how feasible that will be, but that would be good. There's European Parliament friendship groups with the UK and an informal one with Scotland. And in the end, obviously, it's our responsibility, it's our state and our country, but the more help we can have, Look, if you've got an ideological government that is trying to tell our youth that they should be global, not European, and that we're Anglo-Saxon, not European, then I think we need to fight that. And we don't just fight that through campaigns that people no longer want to be part of, but we do it by specific actions. On Starmer, whether we'll see him start to do that, from what I've seen recently, I think not yet. Some people think he's got it right, so that you know, he's aiming for the 2024 election. He's particularly aiming to get back the northern so-called red wool voters that the Tories got in the last election. He's picked up what you've all said, really, you know, that people want to move on from this. And he is, to some extent, running scared of being labelled a Remainer by the tabloids. But to my mind, he seems to keep giving up more and more ground. So one minute he says that he's voting for the trade deal, not because he thinks it's a good deal, but because the alternative is no deal. Whereas the SNP and I think the Lib Dems also voted against the deal because they thought it was such a damaging deal. But he said he'd vote for it, but he would still, you know, call out all the problems with it. But then within a couple of weeks, he started saying, well, this is the deal and the EU won't want to change it. So we just have to work with this deal. And yes, we want to be close to Europe, but we have to work with this deal. So I think he clearly wants to keep the argument away from Europe for the moment. But when you think of what I've already said today, you know, in terms of the 3 weeks in and the level of problems we've got, you can't have a functioning politics if you don't have an opposition speaking out very strongly about anything from culture, the musicians who can't tour anymore, there's Erasmus students who can't do that anymore, to the car industry, to all the smaller industries. There was a great thread on Twitter a few days ago, and I think the Guardian newspaper picked it up, of one of Wales's leading wine merchants who'd built his business up over the last 30 years, and he'd done a lot of advanced preparation on customs and forms and everything, and yet he was still struggling and not sure if he was going to survive. So I suppose the politicians are plugging, you know, trying to change the subject. I think the subject is not going to go away.
We have a problem.
Did a slightly tongue said on be rejoin anymore, and I said, well, maybe England needs its own independence in the EU party. But yes, there must be an extraordinary opening there for a pan-UK rejoin party. The English Greens are pro-EU, but you see the Welsh and the Scottish Greens are all pro-Welsh and Scottish independence. So it is, I think, you know, we're so used to, or I'm so used to thinking of the UK, even now, you know, of being a Labour and Tory and who's going to win, and the Lib Dems are the also-rans. But actually, we're an extraordinarily fragmented state politically. And if you look, the only one of the four parts of the UK that the Tories had a majority in the general election a year ago is England. So Northern Ireland had its own particular range of parties, but the Unionists did less well. Wales, Labour won, and Scotland, the SNP won. So, you know, if you're thinking about redoing or particular policies or why Starmer, you know, Starmer is basically leader of the English Labour Party. And that's how you have to think, I think, about what he's doing. And so, yeah, and I think it's very, you know, I hope Biden is closure. I felt very uneasy. I know a lot of people were so pleased to see his inauguration, and I just felt it's possibly on such shaky ground. There's been so much damage done, you know, and I don't think we are near closure in the UK. Not only because of the damage of the trade and cooperation agreement, but also because of the political dynamics in Northern Ireland and Scotland. So we're in a you know, fascinating but very hard to predict period, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirsty. Who would like to join the discussion? Maybe. Oh yeah, there is Kasia and Andriy. So Kasiu, please put on your microphone. Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you, Joseph. My question is about the potential positive effects of Brexit. Do you envisage any important positive effects of the exit for the UK politics? Because the consequences are usually discussed in the context of intra-European trade or international trade or student mobility, workers' mobility, and obviously they are negative. But there may be also positive effects because some UK policies can be perhaps more effective without the EU bureaucracy, without the bureaucratic supervision of the European Union. For me, an example is the anti-COVID vaccines, which the UK was able to introduce sooner than it was in the case of the European Union because of the medical clearance procedure, which was faster.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we just collect more questions. Andrei.
Perhaps I try to phrase it as a fun question in a way. If you could take a crystal ball and do certain prognosis into the future, I was wondering, based on your experience, but also your research that you have done, do you see any possible game changers, any existential threat, any existential element that could perhaps change the playing field to which you have described with all the diversities? And do you see it perhaps in the UK or in the EU and along the line of something positive or something negative? And to give few things I was thinking about, whether it's the European Green Deal that gives a good indication, or post-COVID or post-pandemic recovery in the EU, or perhaps on the other hand, a lot of criticism going into the government for the current pandemic reactions, although of course the vaccines have been rolled out. But it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on it, if you see anything that could possibly in the future speed up a bit these changes.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I will also add to those questions.
Okay.
You know, in your text, you at the very beginning indicated that by its own wish, UK became a large economic and political satellite of the EU. So, of course, this is something which contradictory to all those imperial ambitions of the UK. So the question is, when people realize this position of a satellite, of course, and it's quite clear, because if we take into account the level of trade exchange or even other links with the EU. So people simply were not aware of those very strong links with the European Union, and only after Brexit they suddenly realize this. And also politicians at certain point must, I believe, realize that they became, I mean, Britain became a satellite instead of even a partner, a serious partner. So this, I mean, this is the basis of my expectations for relatively soon reapplication. I mean, application for accession is returning to European Union. So anyway, so maybe someone still wants to ask. Okay, so Kirsty, you are very much exploited today, but yeah. And you know, we have some problems at certain point.
Thank you. I hope you can.
Yeah. So try to speak maybe to microphone.
Yes, I think you're coming and going. I'm not sure if it's my internet connection, but I hope you can still hear me enough. I do think. Thank you.
Can I just add that if there are interruptions in connection, it helps if you stop video.
Yeah, or what I might do is put, I don't know if this will help, but I'll put my headphones on just in case that helps. Yeah, I don't know if this helps, but otherwise I can turn the video off as well.
I think it's better. It's better. Yeah, it is better.
Okay, I am getting occasional messages that the connection's unstable. I don't know if it's the snow or what, but we're not very good at coping with snow. One general point, it's lovely to get so many thoughtful comments. What I've noticed, and this is a very typical thing for I think both for people in the think tank world, but also in research and academia more widely, is, you know, people move on to, oh, what's the next interesting topic? So one of the things I see happening already in terms of seminars and books and papers is that people are starting to write about the future EU-UK relationship. Because you know, people know we're not going away. We can't suddenly move the country across to the Pacific Ocean. There's going to be lots to discuss. We've got the Johnson government is due to, in February, I think now, to come out with its integrated review of defence. So this will be the spelling out of the global Britain. So in terms of, well, let me start with you, Joseph, your points first. I think certainly the UK becoming a satellite, it certainly does contradict the imperial ambitions and just simply the fact that however you grade it, clearly we've lost influence and power. And we're not in the room, and I think people in the UK don't realize that very well when you think about the density of meetings, not just in Brussels, but across the EU27, whether it's the EU27 diplomats meeting in London or Warsaw, or London as they used to, or whether they're in Delhi or whatever, just that extraordinary amount of conversation that goes on, and we're not in the room. So I don't know that people are suddenly going to realize that. They're going to realize that there's a lot of problems. And as I've already said, the political dynamics of how that might unfold are unclear. But I think, especially because we have almost 4 years of the Johnson government to run, unless there's, you know, a huge outpouring of anger at the way things go, we are going to see a very deliberate attempt to describe the UK as some sort of global power broker. So not quite as an empire, not quite trying to pretend that we're as big as the EU or US, but hey, look, we can convene the D10 democracies that apparently Johnson thinks Biden might be keen on. We can run the Global Climate Conference. We can chair the G7. I'm not quite sure what they then say next year, but there's going to be this attempt to show that we're a free power. We can, you know, we can make foreign policy statements against China on our own. We don't need to do it with the EU. And I may be right in human rights terms, but it may not be as wise as doing it with a group of allies. So I suppose in the sense what I'm saying is, Joseph, I think you're both right. The problem you put is one that the government is actually in a sense and is going to spend time and effort in finding a different language to pretend that we're in a different reality. And I think from what we've already said about the problems with the opposition is that at the moment, they don't know what a good language is to shift people slowly in the other direction back to being more European. And perhaps we'll see it in very small steps. You know, at the moment, it is early days in some ways, I suppose. So at the moment, there's a lot of fuss about musicians not being able to tour, and that's something it's not scary for our opposition parties to pick up on. You know, history does, of course, repeat itself, but not exactly. And we talked already, you talked, Joseph, about the de Gaulle vetoes back in the 1960s. And what was going on then was that the UK discovered, having refused to join the European communities, that EFTA wasn't enough and that it needed to join. And so with Denmark and Ireland, that was the first enlargement in 1973. And you know, could that happen again? Of course it could happen again, but yes, it may take that 10 or 15 or more years. And then also, as I think Kasia was talking about, maybe, you know, where is the EU going next? Is it going to integrate more? I mean, one of the positives of Brexit, the number of people have said, is just that the EU may be able to do more without the UK blocking things. And would the UK really have blocked the big post-COVID reconstruction fund and the ability for the Commission to go out and raise funds on the markets? And where the EU goes next obviously impacts in 10 years' time on the relationship between the UK and the EU. Is it going to get much more integrated? We've been talking since, I think, at least since the early 1990s about a multi-tier or multi-speed or core Europe. And I mean, to some extent, we have that, obviously, because we have most member states in the Euro, but not all member states, as you know, in the Euro. Is there going to be some sort of version of a multi-tier Europe that the UK could join on the outer tier? But I think the problem with that has always been, you know, no countries have really wanted to be in the outer tier. They've always wanted to be at the top table. I never understood the big push in the UK for a soft Brexit, so-called, where we'd be not only like Norway, but we'd stay in the customs union. How you would get a medium-sized power like the UK having no say in its trade policy or its single market policies, given the sensitivity in the whole Brexit debate to having a say. I never understood that. Is there anything positive for the UK? You see, what I understand on the specific example of the COVID vaccines is that actually this could have been done even within the EU. There were emergency powers and possibilities that could be asserted in using your own national medicines regulator. Now, how that would have worked in terms of whether we'd actually joined in the EU mass buying of vaccines is one thing, but I certainly don't think from what I've read that the UK couldn't have done what it did in terms of the timing of the vaccines. I have heard some green activists say that there are some aspects, especially you know, all the challenges in the common agricultural policy and greening the common agricultural policy, that there might be areas where the UK could now more easily do more, though my fear is that it will actually be the opposite. Boris Johnson's already talking about genetic editing of crops that wouldn't be possible in the EU. Some people, including, I don't know if you've come across the historian David Edgerton, who was actually a former colleague and a friend of mine, who's written a lot about England and the UK and post-Second World War history. He argues that if the UK falls apart and Scotland becomes independent and Northern Ireland reunifies with Ireland, that will actually be very positive for England, that England will then learn how to modernize and it will come through its nationalism and it will redefine itself. And it's a very optimistic view. And it's one that I, at the moment, find quite hard to imagine because of the deep divisions I see in England. But these things, as we've said in the earlier part of this discussion, these things are not, you know, that they shift. We don't know where the States is going to go next. There's a lot of Trump supporters out there still, even if there's no Trump. So I don't see it very positively, and I don't see it as I don't yet see it as a wake-up call for England. The reasons we've discussed. Crystal balls and so on, could it all change? Yes, I mean, I think absolutely. I think we're living in a very unstable and unpredictable and shifting time. You know, the COVID pandemic is and remains extraordinary, and you know, we'll see in another year maybe, you know, what the ghastly comparative death tolls look like, but the UK has obviously done really very, very badly, sadly, and both badly in terms of excess deaths and badly in terms of the impact on the economy. How that will change things, it does depend, doesn't it, on the scenarios. So, you know, if the EU manages to rebound from this, as it often does, as we know from crises, so it rebounds with the European Green Deal, with the Recovery Fund, with more confidence, despite the divisions in the EU, with more confidence in its unity, how might that impact, on the UK, and also in the midst of this crucial decade for climate change? So will, some people have worried that relations will stay bad between the EU and UK, partly for some of the reasons I've been talking about, the propaganda and ideology of the Johnson government that we're probably stuck with for another 4 years. And that may be the case, but equally, if the UK manages to calm down, and so it does work with the Europeans on climate, and it does work with the Europeans on Russia or on China, maybe the maybe the sharpness of the divide will go. The economics will get so bad in the UK, or maybe the impact of Scotland having another independence referendum. I think all these things, how they impact on English politics is what's very unpredictable. But I mean, I'm a bit struggling with answering this, because what you don't see yet in the polls, Labour has caught up. In some polls it's gone ahead, but there's still sort of neck and neck for the moment, Labour and Tories. What we saw back in the 1990s after Margaret Thatcher was thrown out and the rather bland John Major took over was that he won the 1992 election, and within a few months Labour went ahead in the polls, and they went more and more ahead in the polls till you had the Blair landslide all those years ago in 1997. And you don't see but the combined crisis, economic crisis of COVID and of Brexit, combined with strains with Scotland, what I don't see, I suppose I see it as unpredictable and unstable, but I just don't see a scenario where in a few years Britain says, that was a nervous breakdown, we're better now, can we rejoin? We know we won't have our opt-outs, and where the EU says, yes, you look so much better and more reliable and sane again, you can come back. I suppose I just don't see that at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Kirsty, I would like to ask you something regarding Scottish chances for independence. I was lucky to participate in a recent discussion with among a few specialists, including you, on this issue. And practically all participants of this discussion simply assumed that this is what will happen. So the matter to discuss was how to do it and what are the problems related to this process. So, the most important now, I think, is to getting agreement with Johnson to agree on referendum. So, what kind of instruments or some measures that you could use are possible to achieve this? I mean, to get it peacefully. I mean, to get Johnson to agree on referendum. Steve wants also ask something. Just a second, I will unmute you. Yeah. Okay.
While we're on the topic of Scottish independence, I also had something I wanted to ask, because I think this is a crucial issue, whether Scotland gets the referendum and whether Scotland becomes independent or not. And then after the result, whether people again want to kind of calm down and move forward. I was lucky enough to still have access to Sky News whilst being here, and I've watched it from time to time, because I found it fascinating the way in which the daily briefings on COVID have been presented in Scotland and in England. In England, we have this kind of rolling cavalcade of different ministers kind of looking kind of blank-eyed at the screen and trying to defend themselves. Sometimes Boris is there, sometimes Boris isn't. When he is there, he's not very convincing. He's a bit of a blusterer, and he seems to be a kind of shifty businessman. If you compare it with Nicola Sturgeon's daily briefings, and this is going out across the UK, and Sky News has a very high viewers. I look at Nicola Sturgeon as being very businesslike, very direct, coming across as modest and willing to admit to mistakes. When she talked about deaths in care homes, she gave a very convincing 15-minute explanation for the mistakes that the Scottish government had made. I found myself, although I'm in favour of Scottish independence, I think my mother's family is Scottish. I found myself trying to look at this as an English person, being convinced that Nicola Sturgeon was a very convincing business manager type person that I would probably trust to run Scotland far more than I would trust Boris to run the UK. So my question to you, Kirsty, is do you see the Nicola effect compared to Alex Salmond? And do you think that recent attempts to discredit Nicola Sturgeon over her supposedly lying about the sexual misconduct, do you think this is an indication that people are actually worried that Nicola Sturgeon could push through and manage an independent Scotland?
Yes, no, I think you're right. You know, the daily COVID briefings have been an extraordinary contrast and very positive for Nicola Sturgeon. Scotland at the moment has high infection rates, but they're about half the level of the infection rates in England at the moment. So, and they're the best of the 4 UK at the moment, although at the start of the COVID crisis, Nicola Sturgeon clearly took a decision to begin with to work hand in glove with Boris Johnson. Pretty understandable, a once in a century pandemic. You know, you expect the centre of the UK state to have the competence and expertise you need. There's an enormous difference, as you know, in terms of the confidence and approval ratings for Nicola Sturgeon compared to those which are positive, compared to those Boris Johnson negative. And on COVID, it's very interesting in Scotland that even Labour unionist voters and even some Tory voters say they have confidence in Nicola Sturgeon in running the pandemic, in managing the pandemic. So these are quite extraordinary levels of support. And you remind me that a couple of years back, on the same point of what an impressive communicator she is, you know, I said as obviously as a joke in a way, but I mean, she would make a very impressive UK Prime Minister, you know. And if she took over the Labour Party, you know, that would be interesting. That would change if you want a crystal ball change. That's not what's going to happen. I think, and I think COVID, as well as Brexit, as well as Boris becoming Prime Minister, all these things have conspired to give us these polls of 57, 58% support for independence. So we should never forget in that back in the referendum in 2014, there was already 45% in favour of independence. So I would say that was driven by a broad self-determination narrative. And I think, you know, we can look at Brexit, we can look at COVID, we can look at youth support for independence, but I think it's a bit early days to say, but it looks like we've passed some sort of tipping point, and where the mass of opinion just is shifting, and where people in 2014, especially some in the middle classes, would say, well, I voted with my head, not my heart, i.e. they voted to stay in the UK. They now feel their head and heart both points in the same direction. The extraordinary standoff between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon over claims of sexual harassment, and then claims of, and obviously he won his court case and was declared innocent, and then counterclaims that this was basically an SNP conspiracy, and that's now being investigated by the Scottish Parliament, who are due to report before they shut in March, for the elections were due at the start of May. So at the moment, that's been Teflon for Nicola Sturgeon. You know, her rankings, you know, she's their most successful leader, you know, in the sense of it looks like there'll be a landslide in May for the SNP at the elections. these extraordinary figures for the last 6 months on independence, but actually this huge civil war inside the SNP. This is again political dynamics, isn't it? The main opposition in Scotland at the moment, I would say, is coming from within the SNP to its own government rather than from the rather ineffective Scottish Tories and Labour. This is another completely unpredictable one. Will the two inquiries that are going on, will they find that Nicola Sturgeon lied to the Scottish Parliament, or that she deliberately misled the Scottish Parliament? And will, if they find that, will it be serious enough that she has to resign? At the moment, the public don't seem to care much, you know, about this, but this could change quite dramatically. But it's very hard to imagine, and it's hard to imagine what would happen if Nicola Sturgeon had to resign before elections due in May. But does that mean you'd suddenly have a Tory Labour landslide coalition? I don't think so. Joseph, your question, nobody knows the answer. How do you get to a referendum if Boris Johnson is saying no? People in Scotland are fully aware that if you want independence in the EU, it has to be through a legal and constitutionally valid process. You need to be recognised internationally. They're fully aware that Spain, but not only Spain, is going to be very sensitive to whether there's an agreement between London and Edinburgh, whether London in the end would recognise an independent Scotland. And so at the same time, there's a lot of discussion about plan Bs, so-called. So if Johnson says no again in May after an SNP victory, says no to a referendum, is there a plan B? So people say, does the Scottish Parliament have the power to advisory referendum? That's unclear. There's a court case on that at the moment, brought by an individual. The SNP didn't want to test that in court yet. Some SNP politicians say that the election itself should just be declared to be a vote on independence. But again, London won't accept that. So I can't tell you exactly what may happen, but I don't find it completely implausible that Boris Johnson could carry on saying no for another 4 years till the next UK general election. But I think it will be very difficult, you know, unless we're in this situation where the SNP performs weakly, because in fact Sturgeon extraordinarily did resign. You're going to have a majority for the SNP and Greens, the Independence Party. You're going to have a very clear mandate. Independence will be in the manifestos. Keir Starmer, who's opposed to independence, but very reluctantly said in the autumn that if there's a mandate in May, then it shouldn't be done during the COVID pandemic, but there will be a democratic mandate for it. So I think the political and social dynamics of how it may unfold are what's going to be fascinating. When Theresa May said no to a referendum in 2017, that was basically accepted, and the SNP did badly, as did Theresa May in the 2017 election. I don't think that's just going to be accepted this time around. So you're not suddenly going to see, well, you're probably not going to suddenly see mass civil disobedience. You know, and independence may be a good or bad idea, but in the end, my view is it's up to, you know, Scotland is a country. It was a union between England and Scotland. If the Scots democratically want to end that, they have that right. And there are, you know, other people who are committed unionists who will actually make that democratic point. So I actually can't answer your question, Joseph, but I don't think simply saying no for 10 years is a serious answer. And one last point. The Northern Ireland and Scottish discussions are usually very separate for fairly obvious reasons. You know, you've got the history of the peace process in Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement. You've now got Northern Ireland in this very strange special status and relations as a result with the Republic of Ireland becoming closer. But the two have a strong impact on each other. At the moment, people tend to talk about it as if the Scottish independence is likely to come first. If it did, that would probably dynamise or speed up the Northern Ireland potential for a border poll. You know, Northern Ireland staying part of the UK is one thing, but staying alongside England and Wales is a different one. And you've got diaspora in both directions. And then on the other hand, if the Northern Ireland situation changed more quickly than people expect, and people in Dublin on the whole don't want it to go too fast at all, but if that changed, I think that would add to the pressures in Scotland. So it's hard to predict, but it's just not, it's not going away as an issue. And whether in 10 years' time the UK will exist, or we'll be discussing what the policies are of the English and Welsh state and what we should call it. And even in Wales, numbers for independence are going up. So it's very unpredictable.
Yeah, thank you very much. So is there any more questions or comments? Oh, yeah, Oleg would like to say something. Yeah, please. You have to put a microphone on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, good.
Myself with my headset. Sorry, apologies. Yes, hello. You mentioned schooling and especially as far as I remember on the GCSE and A level and highers in Scotland. There were a few things that I recall from learning British history, and especially was a clear lack of criticism at that level. It was very what essentially PiS is doing now in Poland, sort of this building of, especially amongst students, I remember talking at the time, British Empire was seen as something positive, right? This positive force, this Western, we bring civilization, we bring science. There was this general narrative, and when you look at the topics you could choose, Tudor politics and this whole romantic idea that the Tudors were these spies and meddling, and it's generally this idea that Britain was, you know, even though we were small in the past, England, you know, we were punching above our weight, we, you know, the scrappy British spirit was ingrained. And my question is, as I study, Britain is, you know, for me, the center of biopolitics as it got implemented. What, in your opinion, especially now, as I heard your example regarding the former Chancellor's of Exchequer's remarks about this Anglo-Saxon culture, and I recall again a debate where Dan Abbott and Michael Portillo were saying, and he's proud of this heritage of the Magna Carta, right? This differentiation that this historical lineage building, like the especially amongst conservatives, that there's this path that they're on, and that there's a British exceptionalism. What role do you think this narrative plays in this construction of a vision of Britain, and in the past, in the present, and what was its impact on Brexit?
Yeah, well, I think that's really very well put, and it's a great way to summarize sort of that core Tory and Brexit and post-imperial nostalgia Britain. And I think what's very interesting in Scotland is that it's not like that. So because Scotland has now had its parliament back for 20 years and sees itself as distinct from England, and because its politics is more social democratic to England's conservatism, the discussion about empire is sometimes the other way around. It's like, it's all very well being critical of empire and criticize these myths and look at all the ghastliness of the British Empire, but that you do have to remember as Scots that Scotland was an important part of that empire and played a part in slavery and played a part in India and played a part everywhere. So it's a very different, and it's in many ways more realistic debate, but it's here in Scotland, but it's also one that you have to keep challenging yourself on. And I think, having said that, therefore, you know, you say this is the narrative of British exceptionalism, and it is, except from Scotland it looks like a narrative of English exceptionalism. So it doesn't work as a story of Britain, it doesn't work as a story of the UK, and I don't think it ever is. And then in England it's fought over, and there's a very broadly, I would say, a left-right division over that.
We don't hear anything now.
System. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about the connection. It's usually pretty good. Anyway, I had really finished my remarks, but I was just saying Scotland also has a separate education and legal system. So yeah, there is a separate and different discussion of history. And if you had, maybe if you had a Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and you had a social democratic UK that was pro-rejoining the EU, to go back to our original topic, maybe Scotland would buy into that. But I think even if England decided it wanted to rejoin the EU, that would actually just make Scottish independence easier, because the big problem with Scottish independence that we haven't really discussed today is that it will put a big border between England and Scotland. It will be the external border of the European Union. Yeah, no, I mean, all these very provoking and interesting. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we are just about to close our meeting, since it usually takes an hour and a half. And I would like to thank you very much, Kirsty, for your presence and your very interesting talk and comments. And I do hope that that we will have a chance to see you in person in Warsaw.
Indeed, that would be great.
In not a very distant future, really.
Yes.
So thank you very much, and I hope.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to have a talk with Oleg later today on Skype. So maybe we'll try to connect. Yeah, there are some things I would like to talk with you. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.